I was sitting in this coffee house, and this old man at the table next to me struck up a conversation. Amazing story.
Let's see then, where to begin?
I was in one of the most beautiful places on earth. It was a time filled with wonder that I'll always remember. When my family chose to move our zoo halfway around the world, that is when my greatest journey began. Next part of the story you will find hard to believe.
A boy, a tiger, and an unforgettable journey across the ocean. But what's the real truth behind the story? Discover hidden facts, powerful symbolism, and my honest review of Life of Pi 2012 in just a few minutes. You're watching Filmy Review Hub. Let's dive into this cinematic masterpiece. Life of Pi is a 2012 adventure drama movie directed and produced by Ang Lee, with the screenplay written by David Meggy. It's based on the best-selling 2001 novel by Jan Martel. The movie stars Suraj Sharma in his very first acting role alongside Irrfan Khan, Tabu, Raves Paul, Gerard Depardieu, and Adil Hussain. The story follows P. Patel, a 16-year-old boy from India whose life changes forever after a terrible shipwreck leaves him stranded in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. His only companion is a massive Bengal tiger named Richard Parker, and together they struggle to survive on a small lifeboat for an unbelievable 227 days. As they face hunger, fear, powerful storms, and the endless ocean, Pi's journey becomes an incredible story of survival, hope, courage, and faith. The movie took a long road before it finally made it to the big screen. Soon after the novel became a huge success, Hollywood started working on turning it into a film. Over the years, several well-known directors, including M. Night Shyamalan, Alfonso Cuarón, and Jean-Pierre Jeunet, were connected to the project at different times. However, the movie didn't truly come together until Ang Lee stepped in to direct it. Production officially moved forward And filming took place during 2011 in several locations, including India, Taiwan, and Montreal, Canada. The movie also relied heavily on groundbreaking visual effects, which were created by Rhythm and Hue Studios. Their work played a huge role in bringing Richard Parker and the movie's stunning ocean scenes to life in a way that felt incredibly real. Life of Pi had its world premiere on September 28, 2012, where it opened the 50th New York Film Festival with special screenings at both the Walter Reed Theater and Alice Tully Hall in New York City. A couple of months later, on November 21, 2012, the movie was released in theaters across the United States by 20th Century Fox. It quickly became both a critical and box office hit, earning more than $609 million worldwide, making it the highest grossing movie of Ang Lee's career. Audiences and critics praised the film for its breathtaking visuals, emotional storytelling, and unforgettable performances. It also earned a long list of awards and nominations. At the Golden Globe Awards, it received nominations for Best Motion Picture, Drama, Best Director, and Best Original Score, winning the award for its incredible musical score. At the 85th Academy Awards, the film received 11 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay, and went on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Director for Ang Lee, making it one of the biggest award-winning films of the year. The movie begins with a novelist visiting P. Patel, now a middle-aged man living in Montreal, Canada. The writer has heard that Pi has an unbelievable story that could make him believe in God, so Pi starts telling him about his life. Pi explains that his full name is Piscine Molitor Patel, named after a famous swimming pool in France. But when he was a kid, other students made fun of him by calling him Pissing Patel. Tired of the teasing, he decided to shorten his name to Pi, just like the famous mathematical symbol. As Pi looks back on his childhood, we learn that his family owned a zoo in Pondicherry, India, where his mother worked as a zoologist. Growing up around wild animals made Pi fascinated by them, especially a powerful Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. One day, Pi gets too close to Richard Parker because he's curious and wants to feed him. His father quickly steps in and warns him that wild animals are never like humans, no matter how calm they seem. To teach Pi a lesson he'll never forget, his father forces him to watch the tiger kill a goat. The shocking moment leaves a lasting impression on Pi and teaches him to respect the true nature of wild animals. As Pi grows older, he becomes deeply interested in religion. He is raised as a Hindu but later discovers Christianity and Islam as well. Instead of choosing just one faith, Pi decides to follow all three because, as he says, he simply wants to love God in every possible way. His mother supports his spiritual journey and encourages him to explore different beliefs. His father, however, is a practical man who believes only in science and logic. He keeps telling Pi to think rationally instead of relying on faith. During his teenage years, Pi meets a beautiful dancer named Anandi, and the two quickly fall in love. Around the same time, Pi's father realizes that the zoo is no longer making enough money to support the family. He decides that their only chance for a better future is to move to Canada and sell the zoo animals there, where they are worth much more. Hoping to start a new life, the entire family boards a Japanese cargo ship called the Tsimtsum along with many of their animals. Everything changes one terrifying night when a massive storm hits the ship. Pi wakes up and rushes onto the deck, where he sees chaos everywhere. As he desperately searches for his family, one of the crew members throws him into a lifeboat to save him. Moments later, the ship begins sinking into the ocean. A frightened zebra jumps onto the lifeboat just before the ship disappears beneath the waves. Pi can only watch in horror as the ship sinks, taking his parents, his brother, and everyone else on board with it. When the storm finally passes, Pi realizes he isn't alone. The injured zebra is still on the lifeboat, and soon an orangutan floating on a bunch of bananas climbs aboard as well. Then a dangerous spotted hyena crawls out from underneath the tarp covering part of the boat. The hyena brutally attacks and kills the zebra before turning on the orangutan. Even though the orangutan bravely tries to protect Pi, she is too weak to fight back and is eventually killed by the hyena. Just when Pi thinks all hope is lost, Richard Parker suddenly bursts out from under the tarp. In seconds, the tiger kills the hyena and takes control of the lifeboat. Pi barely escapes with his life as Richard Parker lunges toward him. That night, The tiger eats the remains of the other animals while Pi realizes he is trapped in the middle of the ocean with one of the world's deadliest predators. Knowing he can't stay on the boat with the tiger, Pi uses ropes, life jackets, and floating supplies to build a small raft that he ties to the lifeboat. From a safe distance, he survives on emergency biscuits and drinking water. As time passes, he learns how to catch fish to feed both himself and Richard Parker. He also collects rainwater whenever storms come. At one point, the tiger jumps into the ocean while chasing fish. Pi thinks about letting him drown, but in the end, he can't do it and helps Richard Parker climb back onto the boat. Life at sea only gets harder. During one frightening night, a giant whale crashes into the lifeboat, destroying most of Pi's remaining supplies. Despite everything, Pi slowly trains Richard Parker to respect his space using a whistle and careful discipline. Over time, the two develop an unusual relationship. Pi eventually realizes that taking care of the tiger gives him a reason to keep fighting for survival every single day. After spending weeks drifting across the ocean, exhausted and nearly starving, Pi and Richard Parker discover a strange floating island covered with edible plants. The island has fresh water, thick mangrove trees, and thousands of friendly meerkats. For the first time in months, both Pi and the tiger are able to eat, drink, and recover their strength. But as night falls, Pi discovers the island hides a terrifying secret. The fresh water turns acidic, the plants become carnivorous, and the meerkats escape into the trees every night to survive. When Pi finds a human tooth hidden inside one of the plants, he realizes the island is actually a deadly trap. The next morning, he and Richard Parker leave before they become its next victims. Eventually, after 227 long days at sea, the lifeboat finally reaches the coast of Mexico. As Richard Parker walks off into the nearby jungle, Pi waits for one last look or some kind of goodbye, but the tiger never turns back. Heartbroken, Pi watches him disappear forever before collapsing from exhaustion. Soon after, rescue workers find Pi and take him to a hospital. Later, two insurance investigators from the Japanese shipping company come to interview Pi. They don't believe his incredible story about surviving with a tiger and ask him to tell them what really happened. This time, Pi tells a much darker version of the events. In this story, the animals actually represent people. The zebra was an injured sailor, the orangutan was Pi's mother, the hyena was the ship's cruel cook, and Richard Parker represented Pi himself. The cook kills the injured sailor and later murders Pi's mother. After witnessing this horrifying act, P finally fights back and kills the cook to survive. Back in the present, the novelist notices how both stories match each other almost perfectly. P asks him which version he believes. The writer chooses the story with the tiger because it's the better and more meaningful story. Pi smiles and replies, "Thank you." And so it goes with God. Later, the novelist reads the insurance report and notices that even the investigators officially recorded that Pi survived 227 days at sea with a Bengal tiger, showing that they also chose to believe the more extraordinary story. Casting director Avi Kaufman and the global search for Pi. Avi Kaufman, a veteran casting director who had previously collaborated with Ang Lee on films like The Ice Storm, Brokeback Mountain, and Taking Woodstock, faced one of her most demanding assignments with Life of Pi. The role of Pisin Molitor Pi Patel required a young actor capable of carrying the vast majority of the film essentially alone on screen, sharing the frame with a digitally enhanced Bengal tiger named Richard Parker, while conveying profound spiritual, emotional, and physical transformation. Kaufman spent 3 months reviewing approximately 3,000 international video submissions from aspiring actors across multiple countries. The search prioritized authenticity to the Indian setting and character background, while ensuring the performer could handle the technical and emotional rigors of a high-budget 3D production shot largely in a controlled tank environment. Kaufman and her team scoured talent in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and extensively in India, where most of the principal photography would occur. The casting process emphasized not just acting ability but also physical endurance, expressiveness, and an innate quality that could sustain audience engagement through long stretches of isolation and wonder. Kaufman traveled to India to meet promising candidates in person after narrowing down the video pool. The emphasis was on finding someone who could embody the transition from an innocent, curious boy to a resilient survivor grappling with faith, fear, and coexistence. This global yet India centric approach helped ground the fantastical elements of Jan Martel's story in cultural specificity, avoiding the pitfalls of a more Hollywood centric casting that might have diluted the protagonist's roots. Discovering Suraj Sharma. From accidental audition to lead the story of Suraj Sharma's casting is one of the most serendipitous in recent cinema history. At the time, Sharma was a 17-year-old high school student in Delhi with no prior acting experience beyond a couple of school plays, one in which he portrayed a tree. He accompanied his younger brother, who was the aspiring actor in the family and had a drama teacher connected to the local casting efforts, to an audition primarily for moral support and the promise of a sandwich afterward. While waiting, a local casting organizer noticed Sharma and encouraged him to audition as well, citing his appropriate age and look. Sharma reluctantly agreed, reading from a survival manual during the initial session. His unassuming appearance, wearing glasses, with a playful demeanor and a chipped tooth, immediately caught the attention of Kaufman's team. Kaufman later described him as having a tricky little smile and being precocious in just the right way, standing out amid more polished but sometimes overly theatrical Bollywood style auditions from other young performers. Sharma progressed through 4 rounds of auditions over 6 months. In the final stages, he met Ang Lee directly. Nervous and shaking, Sharma forgot his lines initially, but Lee calmed him with a brief conversation. On the second take of an emotional monologue, Sharma delivered a performance that moved everyone in the room to tears. Lee was particularly struck by Sharma's soulful, deep eyes, wise and curious expression, and natural screen presence. I saw this very impressive face, Lee recalled. It's a movie face. You can watch him forever with these beautiful, soulful eyes. Lee tested Sharma by having him recount the novel's second, more harrowing story as if it had personally happened to him, imagining the mother and sailor as his own family members. Sharma's ability to fully inhabit the moment with every part of his body engaged convinced Lee that this untrained teenager possessed the raw talent needed. The director viewed Sharma as a little Buddha whose innate qualities could be awakened rather than requiring unlearning of formal techniques. Sharma's parents, both mathematicians, his mother an economist, father a software engineer, were initially hesitant about him missing school, but Lee persuaded them that the experience would be profoundly educational. Sharma's selection over thousands of candidates highlighted the value of fresh, unjaded talent for a role demanding vulnerability and authenticity. His lack of experience meant he approached the character with genuine curiosity, mirroring Pai's own journey of discovery. Post casting, Sharma underwent intensive training. Learning to swim, he couldn't initially, building physical stamina, losing significant weight to depict the emaciated castaway face, and spending hours observing real tigers for realistic reactions. Filming in story order further immersed him, paralleling Pai's arc, younger Pai, ensuring visual and emotional continuity. Casting the younger versions of Pai was crucial for seamless flashbacks that established the character's family life, curiosity, and early spiritual explorations. Gautam Beller portrayed Pai at age 5, capturing the wide-eyed innocence and playful energy of a child fascinated by animals and faith. Ayush Tandon played Pai aged 11 to 12, bridging the gap to adolescence with a performance that conveyed growing awareness of the world's complexities, including school experiences and family dynamics. Kaufman emphasized family resemblance and instant recognizability. You had to feel like it was a family, she noted, and without thinking twice, you had to know that was Pai at 8, that was Pai at 12, and that was Pai at 16. This required meticulous auditions to match facial features, expressions, and mannerisms across the actors. The younger performers' natural chemistry with the adult cast helped sell the Patel family's warmth, and the father's pragmatic zookeeping philosophy contrasted with Pai's exploratory spirit. These child actors brought authenticity to Pondicherry scenes, including zoo interactions, school bullying, and early religious awakenings. Their casting contributed to the film's rich tapestry of Indian life, Grounding the later survival epic in relatable childhood foundations, the Patel family, Tabu Adil Hussain and Ravi's portrayal Tabu was cast as Geeta Patel, Pai's mother, drawing on Kaufman's familiarity with her work. Tabu's established reputation for nuanced, emotionally layered performances made her ideal for a character embodying nurturing strength, cultural tradition, and quiet resilience amid family upheaval. Her presence added gravitas and maternal warmth to the early sections. Adil Hussain was selected as Santosh Patel, Pai's father, after multiple auditions. Hussain's portrayal captured the rational, zoo-running patriarch who teaches Pai lessons about animal nature and survival through practical demonstrations. The chemistry between Tabu and Hussein was essential to believably depict a cohesive family unit facing the decision to emigrate to Canada. For Pai's brother Ravi, multiple actors spanned different ages. Ayan Khan as the 7-year-old, Maud Abbas Khalili as 13-14, and Vaibish Sivakumar as 18 to 19. This multi-actor approach ensured continuity and allowed each to embody Ravi's role as the more conventional, sometimes teasing older sibling. Casting focused on sibling resemblance to Sharma, reinforcing familial bonds that heighten the tragedy of the shipwreck. Adal Pai. Irfan Khan's reflective narration. Irfan Khan portrayed the adult Pai, framing the story through interviews with a writer initially involving Toby Maguire, later replaced. Khan's casting brought intellectual depth and quiet intensity to the role of a man recounting extraordinary events, processing trauma, faith, and survival. His performance required conveying the weight of memory while engaging the listener, making the philosophical undertones accessible. Khan focused on the emotional universality of Peace Tale, aiming to make it the voice of humanity rather than one individual story. He even reshoot scenes after casting changes to maintain consistency. Khan's subtle internalized style complemented Sharma's more visceral youth performance, creating a cohesive character arc across time. Rafe Spall was cast as the writer interviewing Adult Pie, replacing Toby Maguire late in production. Ang Lee opted for an entirely international cast to avoid jarring recognizability reshooting Maguire's scenes. Spall brought an inquisitive, grounded quality that allowed Peace story to unfold naturally. Gerard Depardieu appeared as the cook, a key antagonistic figure in the ship sequences, adding a layer of tension and realisms to the human conflicts aboard the Simpson. His imposing presence heightened the stakes of survival themes. Other notable supporting roles included Andrea Di Stefano as the priest, Shravanti Sainath as Anandi P's love interest, Eli Aloof as Mama Ji, and various teachers and sailors like T.M. Karthik and I. Chen Ko. These choices enriched the cultural mosaic with Indian, Taiwanese, and international actors reflecting the story's themes of coexistence and diversity. Extras and smaller roles cast locally in India and elsewhere populated the zoo ship and Pondicherry scenes authentically. Challenges in family resemblance and cultural authenticity. A persistent challenge was achieving visual family cohesion across ages and actors. Kaufman auditioned extensively to ensure audiences instantly accepted the Patels as a unit. This extended to cultural accuracy, prioritizing Indian actors for Indian roles, shooting primarily in India, and incorporating local casting directors for authenticity in dialects, mannerisms, and settings. The international scope, mixing established stars like Tabu and Irfan Khan with newcomers, balanced familiarity with freshness. Lee's vision favored unknowns for Pai to let the character's journey feel undiluted by star baggage. This decision paid off in critical acclaim for Sharma's breakthrough performance. Ang Lee's direct involvement and production insights. Ang Lee was deeply hands-on, personally auditioning finalists and directing key tests. His calm demeanor and ability to elicit authentic emotion from Sharma exemplified his directorial style. Lee mentored the young lead through swimming lessons, physical transformation, and isolation techniques, limiting on-set interactions to mirror Pai's solitude. The casting choices aligned with Lee's emphasis on emotional truth amid visual spectacle. The Tobey Maguire recast demonstrated Lee's commitment to tonal consistency, prioritizing immersion over name recognition. This flexibility extended to refining other roles for better ensemble harmony, training, preparation, and impact on performances. Post-casting preparations were intensive. Sharma's regimen included daily swimming up to 4 hours, weight loss, tiger observation, and stunt work. Younger actors prepared through rehearsals emphasizing family dynamics. Established actors like Khan and Tabu brought depth from their experience mentoring newcomers subtly. These efforts ensured performances served the story's core faith, survival, and storytelling's power. The casting elevated the film, contributing to its Oscar wins, including for direction and visuals, by making the human element as compelling as the CGI tiger and ocean. Broader casting context and ensemble depth beyond leads, the ensemble featured dancers, bullies, sailors, and investigators, each adding texture. Casting directors in various locations, Calcutta, Pune, Taiwan, handled regional specifics. Voice casting for ADR and uncredited work, including Frank Welker for Richard Parker's vocal elements, rounded out the technical side. The process reflected the film's themes, chance, faith, and unexpected journeys. Sharma's sandwich audition became legendary, underscoring how serendipity mirrored Pai's tale. Kaufman's meticulous work, combined with Lee's vision, assembled a cast that transcended individual performances to create a cohesive transcendent whole. Expanding on Sharma's journey, his post-life of Pi path included returning to studies in philosophy at St. Stephen's College, reflecting the character's intellectual curiosity. His awards and subsequent roles validated the casting gamble on an unknown. Similarly, the younger actors' contributions laid foundational emotional groundwork, making flashbacks poignant anchors. In supporting capacities, actors like James Saito and Jun Naito as insurance investigators framed the real-world skepticism, contrasting Pai's dual stories. Their precise casting maintained narrative ambiguity and philosophical inquiry central to the adaptation. Depardieu's cook and other shipboard figures injected human frailty and conflict, heightening the lifeboat's isolation. Cultural consultants and local input during casting helped navigate sensitivities around religion, family, and Indian society, ensuring respectful representation. This diligence paid dividends in the film's global reception, resonating across cultures while staying true to its origins. The multi-generational Pi portrayals required not only physical likeness but performative consistency in gestures, speech patterns, and emotional timbre. Auditions involved chemistry reads with family actors, testing how convincingly the lineage flowed. Tabu and Hussein's established chemistry from Indian cinema circles aided this, creating believable parental authority and affection. Ravi's actors similarly underwent fittings and rehearsals to match Sharma's energy as a sibling dynamic. These details, though background, were pivotal for immersion, preventing any jarring shifts in the nonlinear narrative structure. Lee's preference for an international yet non-star dominated cast avoided distracting from the universal themes. Spall's everyman quality as the writer facilitated audience proxy, drawing viewers into Pai's recounting without overshadowing it. Khan's gravitas grounded the adult perspective, his voice carrying the story's reflective weight with subtlety that invited contemplation. Technical aspects of casting extended to voice work and motion capture considerations for animal interactions, though primarily handled off via CGI. The human cast's authenticity anchored those elements, making the survival sequences emotionally believable. Overall, the casting of Life of Pi exemplified a blend of intuition, exhaustive search, and collaborative refinement. From Kaufman's initial global trawl to Lee's final approvals and on-set guidance, every choice reinforced the film's magic, turning an improbable survival tale into a profound cinematic experience through performers who lived their roles with conviction and wonder. The result was a cast that not only told Pai's story but embodied its spirit of discovery, resilience, and the boundless potential of the human and animal spirit. Word count: approximately 50-20 Life of Pi 2012 production development and pre-production. The road that led Ang Lee's Life of Pi to movie screens in November 2012 was almost as long and winding as Pai Patel's 227 Days Adrift in the Pacific. Jan Martel's novel, published in 2001, quickly became an international sensation, eventually selling millions of copies worldwide and winning the Man Booker Prize. It did not take long for Hollywood to take notice. Fox 2000 Pictures the literary-minded arm of 20th Century Fox run by studio executive Elizabeth Gabler, acquired the film rights for producer Gil Netter shortly after the book's release, and for a time the studio treated the adaptation as one of its top priorities, with hopes of beginning principal photography as early as the summer of 2006. Turning the novel into a workable screenplay, however, proved to be a persistent headache. The story's central conceit, a teenage boy trapped on a lifeboat with a Bengal tiger for the better part of a year, framed by philosophical musings on storytelling, faith, and survival, did not lend itself easily to a conventional three-act structure, and finding a director willing to take on both the technical and tonal challenges took the better part of a decade. The first filmmaker seriously attached to the project was M. Night Shyamalan, who came aboard not long after Fox 2000 secured the rights. Shyamalan had a personal connection to the material. The novel's protagonist hails from Pondicherry, a former French colonial enclave in South India, a detail that resonated with the director. He was expected to take on the film once he had finished The Village, and he replaced the earlier screenwriter, taking a pass at his own draft. In the end, though, Shyamalan chose to make Lady in the Water instead, later explaining that he had been wary of adapting a book with a twist ending, worried that attaching his name to the project would color audience expectations before they had even seen the film. With Shyamalan gone, Fox 2000 turned to Alfonso Cuarón in the spring of 2005. Cuarón, however, opted to direct Children of Men for Universal Pictures and Strike Entertainment instead, and by that October, the studio had shifted its attention to French filmmaker Jean-Pierre Jeunet, best known for Amélie and A Very Long Engagement. Jeunet's version of the project also failed to move forward, and for the next several years, Life of Pi drifted in development limbo, its budget and technical demands scaring off backers just as consistently as its premise attracted them. The project's fortunes changed in February 2009 when Fox 2000 hired Ang Lee to direct and to oversee a new draft of the screenplay. Although Lee was deeply involved in shaping the script's structure and tone during pre-production, the final screenplay credit went solely to David Magee, a novelist and screenwriter who had previously adapted Finding Neverland. Tom Rothman, who was co-chairman and CEO of Fox at the time, had history with Lee, having overseen the distribution of several of the director's earlier films, and it was Rothman who ultimately gave the go-ahead to greenlight the picture under Lee's stewardship. Casting the film's central role posed its own enormous challenge. The script demanded a teenage actor with no prior screen experience who could believably carry nearly the entire film essentially alone, conveying a vast range of emotion while acting opposite a tiger that would not fully exist until visual effects artists finished their work more than a year later. Lee and casting director Avi Kaufman staged an extensive months-long search across India, ultimately screening more than 3,000 young men. The process stretched across roughly 6 months and several rounds of auditions, eventually narrowing the field to about a dozen finalists before Lee settled on 17-year-old Suraj Sharma, a Delhi student whose parents were both mathematicians, a detail that took on a certain irony given that his character shares his name with a mathematical constant. Sharma had not originally intended to audition at all. He had simply accompanied his younger brother to a casting call and ended up catching Lesai instead. Once cast, Sharma spent months preparing for the physically and emotionally demanding shoot, training in swimming, yoga, and meditation, and he remained on set for the overwhelming majority of the production. Pre-production was not without its moments of near collapse. At one point, executives above Gabler at Fox grew nervous about the financial risk of a water-bound shoot with no major stars attached and informed her that the studio wanted to abandon the project. Gabler recalled having to phone Lee, who was in Taiwan at the time, to deliver the news. Rather than accept defeat, Lee immediately booked a flight to Los Angeles. Once there, he screened pre-visualization footage of the shipwreck sequence for Fox's leadership, including co-chairman Rothman and Jim Janopoulos, along with Sharma's audition tape. The demonstration was persuasive enough that the studio agreed to proceed, provided Lee could trim the budget. Fox had originally balked at a proposed budget of around $70 million for a 3D shoot centered on a raft at sea and a fully digital tiger. The final negotiated budget for the film came in at roughly $120 million. Lee committed early on to shooting the film natively in stereoscopic 3D rather than converting it in post production, a decision that shaped nearly every subsequent choice about cameras, lighting, and effects work. He has spoken about the thematic reasoning behind his visual approach to the film, describing water as a symbol of faith and life for Pi and air and sky as standing in for the spiritual and the unknown. Before committing to a photorealistic computer-generated tiger, Lee also approached visual effects house Rhythm and Hues in August 2009 to test whether a digital creature would read as more or less convincing when rendered in stereo 3D, a question that would define the production's most difficult technical undertaking. The writing of the screenplay itself was its own extended undertaking. Fox 2000 President Elizabeth Gabler has explained that when the studio began searching for a screenwriter capable of handling the tonal and structural demands of the novel, she thought immediately of David Maggie's earlier adaptation of Finding Neverland, reasoning that the project shared several qualities with Life of Pi. Both featured adult and child protagonists, both carried a mystical or fantastical dimension, and both required a screenwriter comfortable balancing heavy emotion with restraint. Coincidentally, Lee and Maggie had nearly collaborated on an unrelated project a couple of years earlier, one that had ultimately fallen apart over rights issues, but the near miss had left Lee eager to work with the writer when the opportunity arose again. Because Lee was based in Manhattan and Maggie lived in New Jersey, the two were able to work in unusually close, hands-on collaboration throughout the drafting process. Maggie, a former stage actor whose earlier career as a voice actor recording audiobooks had in his own account helped train him to think about adaptation, has described the challenge of condensing Martel's philosophically dense novel into a workable feature-length script, noting that a typical screenplay runs to only a fraction of a novel's length and that his job was less about literal translation than about isolating the emotional and thematic essence the filmmakers wanted to preserve. Maggie's script eventually earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay, alongside a Satellite Award win in the same category. Financing a production of this scale and risk required Fox to bring in outside partners rather than fund the film entirely on its own. The finished picture was ultimately presented as a Fox 2000 Pictures production in association with Dune Entertainment and Ingenious Media, built around a Haishang Films and Gilnetter production, with additional support from Big Screen Productions and Ingenious Film Partners, a structure that allowed the studio to spread the financial risk of the roughly $120 million budget across several co-financing partners. Extensive local support from the Taiwanese government also played an important role in making the Taichung shoot feasible. The production formally credited the Taiwan Government Information Office, the Taichung City government under Mayor Jason Hu, the Pingtung County government, and a range of local institutions including the Taipei Zoo, Kenting National Park, and Taiwan's Coast Guard Authority for their assistance, reflecting the scale of cooperation local officials extended in exchange for the international attention and economic activity the production brought to the region. Officials in Puducherry likewise assisted with permits and access for the Indian portion of the shoot, including cooperation from India's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and the Animal Welfare Board of India. Given the production's use of live tigers and other animals during filming there, casting choices beyond the role of young Pai also shifted during pre-production. The framing device of the film, in which an older adult version of Pai recounts his story to a visiting writer, required an actor to play that unnamed novelist character. On the role was initially given to Tobey Maguire, who had worked with Lee twice before, on The Ice Storm and Ride with the Devil. Lee ultimately reconsidered the choice, however, concerned that a face as immediately recognizable as Maguire's would prove distracting to audiences and pull focus away from the story itself, in much the same way that attaching a marquee name to the project had worried Shyamalan years earlier. Maguire's scenes were subsequently reshot with British actor Rafe Spall in the role instead. Irrfan Khan was cast as the adult Pai Patel, Tabu played Pai's mother, Adil Hussein played his father, and Gerard Depardieu appeared in a supporting role as a ship's cook. Lee later described Life of Pi as the most difficult film he had made up to that point in his career, a production that, counting the years spent in development before he ever came aboard, occupied close to 4 years of his life from his initial hiring through the film's release. Speaking to reporters around the time of the film's release, Lee explained that he had worked hard throughout production to give what he considered fundamentally an art house story broad enough appeal to succeed as a popular film as well, noting that while a smaller, more niche production could simply explore the story's philosophical and spiritual questions on their own terms, a film of this budget needed to move audiences emotionally as well, which he considered the more difficult balance to strike. He also described one of the production's persistent underlying challenges as the basic difficulty of filming animals convincingly on a churning, unpredictable body of water, a problem he ultimately concluded could only be solved by leaning into 3D and digital animation rather than attempting to stage the interactions practically. Filming principal photography began in India in March 2011, roughly a year later than originally hoped, following the budget renegotiations that had kept the project in limbo. The production shot its opening sequences over about 10 days in Pondicherry, the coastal town where Pai's family runs a zoo in both the novel and the film. For these scenes, the production mobilized around 600 crew members, nearly half of them local hires, along with roughly 500 local residents working as background extras. The city's botanical garden was transformed into the fictional Pondicherry Zoo for the shoot, and the filmmakers secured rare permission to film inside a centuries-old temple. One overnight sequence alone involved 2,000 extras and around 20,000 traditional oil lamps, each one requiring continuous monitoring by crew members to manage the open flames safely. From Pondicherry, the production moved to Munnar, a hill station in the Idukki district of Kerala, known for its sprawling tea plantations, where the crew filmed additional scenes depicting the Patel family's life in India, including an outing among the region's tea estates. The lush, misty landscape of Munnar gave the filmmakers a naturally cinematic backdrop that required little embellishment. Filming in India wrapped by the end of January 2011, and the production then relocated to Taiwan, where it would remain for roughly 5.5 months, by far the longest single stretch of the shoot. Taiwan held particular significance for Lee, who was born in Pingtung County on the island, and the production made extensive use of local infrastructure and government support. Sequences were filmed at the Taipei Zoo and in Kenting National Park, located in Lee's home county, but by far the most significant piece of Taiwanese infrastructure built for the film was a purpose-built water tank facility constructed on the site of the former Taichung Shunan Airport. Working with the local Taiwanese government, Lee's production team converted the airport's existing hangars and open land into what was, at the time, described as the largest self-generating wave tank ever built for a motion picture. The tank measured approximately 70 meters long by 30 meters wide and about 4 meters deep, holding roughly 1.7 million gallons of water, and it was engineered to generate a wide range of water textures and wave patterns to match the many different moods of the ocean depicted in the story. For the film's most violent sequences, the sinking of the cargo ship Simsom and a massive storm scene late in the film, the production replaced practical water in the tank with computer-generated water entirely, since the size and violence of those effects exceeded what the physical tank could safely reproduce. Suraj Sharma spent an enormous portion of the shoot in and around this tank, to the point that he later described it as starting to feel like a second home, because so much of his performance required him to react convincingly to a tiger that was not physically present. The production used a mix of practical and technical solutions to help him. On some days, crew members stationed in rubber rafts nearby would throw rubber fish at him as hard as they could to simulate the chaos of feeding a tiger during a storm, while for full raw footage, real Bengal tigers were occasionally brought onto specially secured sets. Visual effects supervisor Bill Westenhofer later described the balance as a good mixture of the low-tech and the high-tech. noting that despite the film's sophisticated CGI, some of its most crucial reference footage was created using distinctly old-fashioned means. The production also filmed in Montreal, Quebec, primarily for scenes depicting the story's framing device, in which an adult Pai Patel, played by Irrfan Khan, recounts his story to a visiting Canadian writer, played by Rafe Spall. These sequences, set in the present day of the story rather than in Pai's youth, provided a narrative anchor for the extended flashback sequences that make up the bulk of the film. Working with live animals, even on a limited basis, brought its own set of logistical and safety considerations. Real Bengal tigers were used for specific self-contained shots in which the animal's action did not need to precisely match a scripted beat, giving trainers latitude to let the animals behave naturally within a controlled environment while cameras capture reference material and, in some cases, usable footage in its own right. Handling such an animal on a production of this scale required close coordination between animal trainers, the production safety personnel, and the visual effects team, who needed footage shot from consistent angles and lighting conditions in order to make later digital augmentation blend seamlessly with any practical elements retained in the final shots. Zoo and wildlife industry consultants were also brought in to advise on the behavioral accuracy of the other animals featured in the story's early shipwreck sequence, including a hyena, a zebra, and an orangutan, ensuring that even brief or partially digital appearances by these creatures reflected realistic animal behavior rather than anthropomorphized performance. The scale of the production's physical infrastructure extended well beyond the wave tank itself. Sets recreating the interior and exterior of the cargo ship Chimsum were built to allow for large-scale destruction sequences during the shipwreck, while the Pondicherry Zoo sets required extensive period-appropriate detailing to convincingly depict a mid-20th century Indian municipal zoo, down to enclosure design, signage, and landscaping. Production designer David Gropman led the effort to give each of the films very different settings. Coastal India, the interior of an aging freighter, and the featureless expanse of the open Pacific, a distinct and coherent visual identity, work that was later recognized by the Art Directors Guild. Throughout the shoot, cinematographer Claudio Miranda worked closely with Lee to realize the film's distinctive visual language, planning for images that would need to work simultaneously as raw plate photography, as a canvas for extensive digital augmentation, and as a coherent stereoscopic 3D experience. Because the tiger, the ocean in its more extreme forms, and much of the surrounding environment would ultimately be replaced or enhanced digitally, Miranda and his camera team had to shoot with a level of precision and forward planning that gave the visual effects artists workable, consistent reference material to build from. The production used Cameron Pace Group's stereoscopic 3D rig, the same system James Cameron had helped develop and popularize with Avatar, reflecting the scale of Fox's technical ambitions for the picture. Miranda has said that the production used Pace's Fusion 3D camera system in part because of the vendor's prior experience with underwater photography, which proved essential for several key sequences requiring the camera itself to be submerged, including a widely noted shot in which the camera follows Pai as he runs and dives directly into the water. Miranda settled on the Arri Alexa digital camera after conducting side-by-side tests against other cameras of a pier in Los Angeles, concluding that the Alexa's handling of highlights on water was unmatched and that its imagery held up without appearing artificial or overly digital, a quality he considered critical for a film built so heavily around expansive ocean vistas. Because Taichung had little in the way of an existing film production infrastructure, virtually the entire camera, lighting and rigging package had to be shipped from Los Angeles in a series of container loads. Within the specially built wave tank, Miranda and his lighting team worked to create as many as 10 distinct lighting looks over the course of the shoot, ranging from a bioluminescent phosphorescent night ocean to soft moonlight, from two visually distinct storm sequences deliberately differentiated in tone, with the film's climactic storm rendered in a more desaturated palette than an earlier one, to warm, saturated sunsets inspired in part by classical paintings Miranda studied for reference. Lee and Miranda reportedly went swimming together in phosphorescent water during preparation for the film, specifically to draw inspiration from the experience firsthand. Beyond the wave tank, Miranda has singled out the Pondicherry night sequence lit by tens of thousands of candles as one of the shoot's most memorable and logistically demanding undertakings, requiring careful coordination between the camera department and the large crew responsible for lighting and monitoring the flames throughout the night. By the time filming wrapped, the production had spanned three very different environments: the temples and gardens of coastal India, the misty hill country of Kerala, and the custom built sound stages and wave tank of Taiwan, with additional studio work in Montreal over a shooting schedule that stretched across much of 2011. Post production, if pre production and filming presented Lee and his collaborators with enormous logistical puzzles, post production presented an even greater creative and technical one. The film's second lead character, the 450-pound Bengal tiger Richard Parker, would ultimately be composed almost entirely of computer generated imagery, and its believability would determine whether the entire film worked. Visual effects supervisor Bill Westenhofer, working at Rhythm and Hughes Studios, led the effort to bring Richard Parker to life. Lee had approached the studio specifically because of its earlier work creating Aslan, the CG lion in the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And Westenhofer has described Richard Parker as something of a spiritual successor to that earlier character, built using tools and expertise the studio had developed across projects going back to 2001's Cats and Dogs. Even so, the tiger presented challenges beyond anything the studio had previously attempted. Muscle simulation was central to making the animal's movements feel authentic, with animators building multiple simulated layers beneath the visible coat, including underlying muscle and fat layers, to ensure that the tiger's skin and fur reacted correctly as it moved, breathed, and reacted to the churning water around it. The studio's approach relied heavily on reference footage of real tigers, which was used not to be directly composited into the film but to inform and calibrate the animator's work frame by frame. Westenhofer has explained that the team deliberately avoided leaning on any single real tiger's mannerisms for too long in any given shot, worried that lingering too closely on a tiger's expression risked making the animal appear anthropomorphized in a way that would undercut its believability as a wild predator rather than a storybook character. Rhythm and Hughes built an extensive library of reference clips and drew from whichever pieces best conveyed the intended beat of a scene, while still allowing room for small, spontaneous feeling motions, a twitch of an ear, a shift of weight that helped preserve the illusion of a living, unpredictable animal. In total, the film contains 158 individual CG shots of the tiger, the product of roughly a year of dedicated work by a team that, at its peak, included around 40 animators and 120 additional artists working across facilities in the United States and India. Depending on which figures from the production are cited, real footage of an actual tiger appears in a comparatively small fraction of Richard Parker's total screen time. Reporting from the period placed the ratio at somewhere between roughly 1 in 8 shots to as little as 15% real footage, with the overwhelming majority of the character's presence built frame by frame inside the computer. So convincing was the final result that when the film was submitted for certification in India, the country's film board initially balked at approving a scene in which the emaciated tiger appears near death, believing that the production had subjected a real starving animal to filming. Rhythm and Hughes had to provide reference materials proving that the shot was entirely computer generated before certification could proceed. Westenhofer and his collaborator, animation supervisor Eric Jan de Boer, have both spoken about the freedom and pressure that came from essentially inventing Richard Parker's performance from scratch, describing it as an unusually open creative brief compared to typical effects work. Since so much of the emotional weight of individual scenes rested on choices the animators made about the tiger's posture, breathing, and gaze. At the same time, because the production had deliberately filmed a modest number of shots featuring real trained tigers performing simple self-contained actions, the visual effects team held themselves to those shots as a benchmark, refusing to let the CG work look like an obvious shortcut. Westenhofer later told reporters that this decision set our bar high, pushing the artist toward photorealism they felt had not previously been achieved with the digital animal. Rhythm and Hughes was the lead visual effects vendor on the film, but a range of additional studios contributed specialized work across the production. Crazy Horse Effects handled matte painting and period specific effects work. Look Effects completed composite work, particularly in sequences set in the cargo ship's hold. Christoph Effects contributed to a stylized comic book inspired sequence. Lola VFX, a studio known for digital body manipulation, was brought in to convincingly imitate the appearance of both Pi and Richard Parker for the film's later scenes, in which prolonged starvation has visibly ravaged both survivors. And Ulasco created several stereoscopic montage sequences and dissolved transitions used throughout the film. Additional stereo conversion and finishing work was completed by Reliance MediaWorks and Stereo D alongside an in-house compositing team. Editing on the film was handled by Tim Squires, a longtime collaborator of Lee's who had cut several of the director's earlier films, including Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Brokeback Mountain. Given the unusual nature of the production, with much of the film's central performance not fully realized until well after photography had concluded, the editing process required close, ongoing collaboration with the visual effects teams to ensure that pacing, performance timing, and the emotional rhythm of scenes between Pi and Richard Parker worked even as the tiger's final appearance was still being refined. The scale and difficulty of the visual effects work on Life of Pi became a point of wider industry discussion after the film's release. When Rhythm and Hughes filed for bankruptcy protection only weeks before the film went on to win the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, a circumstance that drew attention to the financial pressures facing effects houses even on high-profile, critically lauded productions. Sound design was another crucial, if less publicly discussed, component of the film's post-production. Sound designer Eugene Gatti and supervising sound editor Philip Stockton worked to build an immersive audio environment for the film's long stretches at sea, layering the sounds of wind waves, creaking wood, and the tiger's breathing and vocalizations to reinforce the sense of isolation and danger even during scenes with minimal dialogue. Because so much of the film unfolds with only two characters, one of them non-verbal, sound played an outsized role in conveying tension, mood, and the passage of time across Pi's 227 days adrift. The film's sound mixing team, led by re-recording mixers including Ron Bartlett, D.M. Hemphill, and production sound mixer Drew Coonin, was recognized for this work with an Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Mixing, one of the film's 11 total Oscar nominations. Beyond the visual effects work, post-production also involved an unusually delicate approach to pacing and rhythm, given the film's dual structure of framing device conversations set in the present and extended flashback sequences depicting Pi's time at sea. Squires has spoken in the past about the particular challenge of cutting a film in which so much of one character's performance, Richard Parker's, did not yet exist in any final form during the editing process, meaning that early cuts of many sequences had to be assembled using rough animatics, pre-visualization material, or placeholders shots with final timing adjustments made only once finished animation arrived from Rhythm and Hughes. This workflow required an unusually iterative relationship between the editorial and visual effects departments, with scenes frequently revisited and refined together well into the later stages of post-production, long after a conventional live-action film would typically have locked its cut. The sound design and score likewise had to be built around a fluid, evolving picture edit, adding another layer of complexity to a post-production period that stretched across much of 2012 before the film's completion in the fall. Music, the film's score, was composed by Michael Dana, a Canadian composer who had by that point worked with Ang Lee on two previous projects. For Life of Pi, Dana drew together an unusually wide palette of musical traditions, blending elements of Indian classical and popular music, South Asian and Middle Eastern instrumentation, European cabaret-style flourishes, and a more conventional Western orchestral framework, reflecting the story's movement between Pondicherry, the open ocean, and eventually Canada. The score's most prominent and widely noted piece is Pi's Lullaby, which serves as the film's opening title song. Composed by Dana, with Tamil language lyrics written and performed by Carnatic vocalist Bombay Jayashri, the song sets the tone for the film from its very first frames. Jayashri has described how Lee guided her toward the song's emotional register, telling her that a child sleeps not because he is tired, but because he feels safe, a sentiment she tried to carry directly into the melody and lyrics. Sitar and tabla textures open the piece before Jayashri's vocal establishes what becomes one of the score's recurring melodic ideas. Though critics writing about the score later noted that this central theme, while beautiful, resurfaces relatively sparingly across the rest of the score rather than functioning as a constant musical anchor. Pai's lullaby later became the subject of a public dispute after its release. The Irrfan Thampi Memorial Trust alleged that the opening lines of the song were not an original composition but rather a Tamil translation of a well-known Malayalam language lullaby by the 19th century poet Irrfan Thampi, titled Omana Thinkal Kidavo, a piece Jayashri had also drawn on for a separate album years earlier. Jayashri denied that the song constituted plagiarism, maintaining that she had written what came to her personally in composing the piece. The soundtrack album was first made available for streaming in October 2012, ahead of the film's wide theatrical release, before receiving a full physical and digital release on November 16, 2012 through Sony Classical, just days before the film opened nationwide in the United States. Peace Lullaby was also issued separately as a promotional single to support its awards consideration. Beyond the opening lullaby, the remainder of the roughly hour-long album moves through a wide range of moods and instrumental colors, tracking the story's shifts from the warmth of Pai's childhood in Pondicherry to the terror and disorientation of the shipwreck and the long meditative stretches of open ocean that follow. Tracks such as Pisin Molitor Patel, Leaving India, and Pondicherry lean into the film's Indian settings with sitar, tabla, and vocal textures, while later cues built around the storm and shipwreck sequences shift toward a more expansive, dissonant orchestral palette designed to convey danger and chaos. Much of the score is wordless, relying on instrumental texture and at points wordless vocalizing rather than sung lyrics to build its emotional atmosphere, with Pai's Lullaby standing as the album's sole fully lyrical vocal piece. Reviewers assessing the finished score after its release frequently praised Dana's success in weaving together such a wide array of musical traditions into a coherent whole, describing the completed work as one of the standout film scores of 2012, while also noting that the recurring melodic idea introduced in the opening lullaby could, at times, feel underused across the score's remaining hour, appearing less frequently than some listeners might have expected, given how memorable the opening theme proved to be. The score went on to become one of the most honored aspects of the production. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Score at the 85th Academy Awards, as well as the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score, and Pai's Lullaby itself earned a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Original Song, notably the first time a Tamil language song had ever been nominated in that category. Critics reviewing the score after its release praised Dana's ability to weave together such disparate musical traditions into something cohesive, though some also noted that listeners without an affinity for extended passages of traditional Indian and Middle Eastern instrumental texture might find long stretches of the score more challenging than the immediately accessible opening lullaby. Released theatrical Life of Pi had its worldwide premiere as the opening film of the New York Film Festival, screening at both the Walter Reed Theater and Alice Tully Hall in New York City on September 28, 2012. The choice to open a major festival with the film signaled the level of prestige Fox and its award strategists hoped to build around the picture in the months leading up to its commercial debut. The film went into wide release in the United States on November 21, 2012, timed to the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, a date traditionally used by studios to capture the extended holiday movie-going weekend. It opened in 902 theaters and shared its release date with several other wide releases that week, including the animated film Rise of the Guardians, the action remake Red Dawn, and the awards contender Silver Linings Playbook, creating a notably crowded holiday marketplace. Over the 5-day Thanksgiving frame, Life of Pi grossed roughly $30 million domestically, a solid but not spectacular start for a film that had cost more than $120 million to produce, especially given pre-release analyst projections that had pegged the film's likely domestic total below $70 million altogether. Fox's marketing campaign leaned heavily into comparisons with James Cameron's Avatar, at times promoting Life of Pi in trailers and television spots as a spiritual successor of sorts in terms of its technical ambition and use of 3D. Cameron himself became part of the film's promotional push, appearing in features discussing the film's stereoscopic photography and its computer-generated imagery. And he later publicly praised the film for demonstrating that 3D technology did not need to be reserved exclusively for large-scale action spectacles to be effective. The marketing campaign also included a movie tie-in re-release of Martel's original novel, capitalizing on the built-in readership the book had accumulated since 2001. There was some pre-release concern within Fox regarding the film's climactic storm sequence, given that Hurricane Sandy had struck the northeastern United States only weeks before the film's release and caused widespread devastation. Some observers speculated that unintentional associations between the film's fictional storm and the very real disaster might dampen box office turnout. A studio spokesperson indicated at the time that there were no plans to alter the film's marketing approach in response. The film's New York Film Festival premiere in late September 2012 generated substantial early buzz and served as an effective launching point for the months-long awards campaign that followed, with reviews out of the festival largely positive and helping to establish the film's reputation as a genuine awards contender well ahead of its commercial opening. The choice to premiere at Lincoln Center rather than at one of the fall's more industry-oriented festivals was seen by some observers as a deliberate signal from Fox that it intended to position the film as a serious artistic achievement rather than simply a technical showcase, even as its 3D photography and effects-driven premise might otherwise have suggested a more conventional studio blockbuster playbook. In the 2-month gap between the festival premiere and the film's wide theatrical release, Fox rolled out an extensive promotional campaign that included television advertising built around the film's most striking visual imagery, a series of behind-the-scenes features highlighting the technical achievement of creating Richard Parker, and press appearances by Lee, Sharma, and other members of the cast and crew across both domestic and international markets. Rather than opening simultaneously around the world, Fox staggered the film's international rollout across several weeks and months following its American debut, a strategy common for major studio releases of the period, but one that took on particular significance for Life of Pi, given how central its eventual overseas performance would prove to its overall commercial success. The film opened in a number of Asian markets, including China, in the weeks immediately following its American release, allowing the studio to build word of mouth and adjust its marketing emphasis market by market rather than relying on a single unified global campaign. This approach gave Fox's international distribution and marketing teams the flexibility to tailor advertising, publicity appearances, and release timing to local moviegoing patterns and holidays, a flexibility that later analyses of the film's box office performance credited as a meaningful contributor to its ultimate success abroad. Domestically, the film's performance over its opening weeks was described by industry press as respectable but unremarkable, with American audiences appearing somewhat slower to embrace the film's deliberately meditative pace and unconventional, framed narrative structure than international audiences ultimately would. It was in overseas markets that the film transformed from a moderate domestic performer into a genuine global blockbuster. China, in particular, proved to be an extraordinary success story for the film. Within roughly 2 weeks of its Chinese release, Life of Pi had already grossed more than $68 million in that market alone, a total that at the time exceeded what films such as The Dark Knight Rises and The Amazing Spider-Man had earned across their entire theatrical runs in China, and which had already surpassed the film's own North American gross to that point. Within a month of release, the Chinese total reached roughly $90.8 million, making China the single largest overseas contributor to the film's box office performance. Coverage of the film's reception in China noted that it became something of a cultural phenomenon there, generating millions of social media posts, aided by the fact that Ang Lee, though based primarily in the United States, was born in Taiwan and toured China to promote the film personally, along with the fact that tigers hold particular cultural resonance in Chinese tradition. The film also performed strongly in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and India, and continued to hold the top of the Chinese box office even against the release of high-profile local historical epics in the weeks following its debut, at one point retaining its lead despite having been pulled from many of the country's premium IMAX screens to make room for a competing release. The international box office pattern extended well beyond Asia, with strong results also reported across Europe, Latin America, and Australia in the weeks that followed. Analysts and trade press at the time noted that the film's overseas dominance reflected a broader shift in the industry, with international markets accounting for an increasingly large share of overall theatrical revenue. Reporting from the period placed the figure at roughly 70% of total theatrical revenue industry-wide, and Life of Pi became something of a case study in how a film could underperform relative to expectations global hit on the still strength of a well-executed market by market international rollout paired with region specific promotional strategies tailored to local audiences. Home media Life of Pi arrived on home video in North America on March 12, 2013, released by 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment across DVD, standard Blu-ray, and Blu-ray 3D formats, with the international release preceding it slightly on March 8. Pricing at launch reflected the format's premium positioning, with the standard DVD listed at $29.98, the Blu-ray at $39.99, and the Blu-ray 3D edition, allowing viewers to experience Lee's stereoscopic photography at home, priced at $49.99. The primary home video package was issued as a 2-disc Blu-ray, ultraviolet, and DVD combo edition. The Blu-ray disc included the feature film alongside a substantial collection of bonus material. A 20-minute documentary titled Remarkable Vision focused on the film's visual effects and technical achievements. A much longer, hour-long documentary called Epic Journey, offering a broader behind-the-scenes account of the production, and a shorter 5-minute featurette titled Tiger, Tiger Burning Bright, centered specifically on the creation of Richard Parker. The release also included galleries of conceptual and promotional artwork from several contributing artists, along with a collection of storyboards used during pre-production and filming. A separate standard DVD disc paired with a digital copy contained the film only, without the extended bonus features. Critical assessment of the Blu-ray release was largely positive, with reviewers highlighting the disc's 1080p AVC video transfer as a faithful showcase for Claudio Miranda's Oscar-winning cinematography, praising its vivid color reproduction and fine visual detail, from individual wave crests to the texture of the tiger's fur, alongside a robust DTS HD Master Audio 7.1 soundtrack. Some reviewers observed that the 3D presentation, when compared side by side with the standard Blu-ray transfer, showed slightly more muted contrast, though clarity remained consistent across formats. The disc's supplement package was generally well received as a thorough behind-the-scenes account of an unusually complicated production. Reviewers covering the release for home theater and disc-focused publications frequently concluded that, while the film's story and pacing might not appeal equally to every viewer, the technical presentation of the disc itself was close to a reference quality showcase, calling it a release where the visual style of the film clearly took precedence, and describing the overall package taken as a whole as highly recommended for anyone with a home theater setup capable of doing the transfer justice. International home video release dates varied somewhat from the North American schedule, with several territories receiving the Blu-ray, Blu-ray 3D, and DVD editions several days ahead of the March 12 North American date, part of a broader global rollout coordinated by Fox's home entertainment division to align disc availability with regional marketing pushes, and in some markets, to capitalize on continued theatrical engagements that had extended well into the new year on the strength of the film's award season visibility. The film later received a further home video upgrade with an Ultra HD Blu ray release, offering a 4K presentation that reviewers described as a meaningfully improved visual experience over the original Blu ray, particularly suited to a film built so heavily around detailed digital imagery and expansive natural vistas. Though the audio mix and the bundled bonus features carried over largely unchanged from the earlier release, alongside its physical media releases, Life of Pi was also made available through digital retail and rental platforms, including iTunes and other early 2010s digital storefronts, allowing consumers to purchase or rent the film without a physical disc as digital distribution continued to grow in prominence during this period. The film's home video and digital performance benefited considerably from the wave of publicity surrounding its award season success. Its March 2013 disc release arrived only weeks after its dominant showing at the Academy Awards, allowing Fox's home entertainment marketing to lean heavily on the film's 4 Oscar haul, including its high-profile Best Director win, as a key selling point. The combination of striking visual reference material well suited to demonstrating home theater technology along with its awards pedigree made the disc a frequently cited demonstration title within the videophile and home theater enthusiast community for several years following its release, particularly once the Ultra HD Blu-ray edition became available and offered an opportunity to showcase 4K and high dynamic range display technology using the film's vivid oceanic and jungle imagery. Reception box office Life of Pi was produced on a budget widely reported at around $120 million, a substantial sum for a film built around a teenage newcomer, a largely computer-generated co-star, and a plot with limited conventional action set pieces to anchor a marketing campaign. Against that budget, the film went on to gross approximately $609 million worldwide, a result that comfortably classified it as a hit and made it one of the more surprising box office success stories of 2012, given how uncertain its commercial prospects had appeared throughout its long and troubled development. Domestically, the film opened to roughly $22.4 million over its opening weekend from 2,902 theaters, expanding to approximately $30 million across the full 5-day Thanksgiving frame. Its North American theatrical run ultimately totaled a bit over $124 million, a figure that, while solid, represented only a modest fraction of the film's eventual worldwide haul. The overwhelming majority of the film's box office, reporting at the time, placed the figure at more than 80% of total ticket sales, came from outside the United States, an unusually lopsided split for a major English-language studio release of that era. China proved to be the single most important international market for the film by a wide margin, with the film's Chinese box office climbing past $90 million within its first month of release there, exceeding grosses recorded in territories such as the United Kingdom and even for a period surpassing the film's own North American total. In just the film's second week of release in China, it took in roughly 160 million yuan, or approximately $25.7 million in a single week, comfortably outpacing competing new releases from prominent local directors and remaining the top film in the country for a second consecutive week, despite the added competition, even after having been pulled from a significant number of the country's premium IMAX screens to accommodate an incoming local release. The film's affinity with Chinese audiences was aided by more than just Lee's Taiwanese background. Commentators at the time also pointed to the cultural significance of tigers within Chinese tradition and the film's broadly spiritual, non-denominational themes as factors that resonated particularly strongly there, alongside a surge in demand for premium 3D and IMAX presentations that had been building in the Chinese exhibition market since the earlier success of Avatar. The film also performed strongly across Taiwan, Hong Kong, and India, aided by Ang Lee's stature as a filmmaker with roots in the region, as well as robust results throughout Europe, Latin America, and Australia. India, a market notoriously difficult for non-local titles to break into, still produced a gross north of $10 million for the film, a comparatively strong result given the market's typical resistance to English language imports. Industry commentary framed the film's box office trajectory as a notable example of a mid tier domestic performer transformed into a substantial global hit almost entirely on the strength of its international rollout. And Fox executives at the time credited the result to a combination of careful market specific promotional strategies and the film's broad, largely dialogue light visual appeal, which translated easily across language barriers. Fox International President Paul Hanneman expressed optimism about the film's prospects even before its full international run had played out, a confidence that the film's ultimate box office performance went on to justify many times over. The film's commercial success was also notable for arriving in a crowded late 2012 marketplace dominated by adult skewing awards contenders such as Lincoln and Django Unchained, in which Life of Pi stood out in part because of its relatively rare status as an FX driven film also suitable for family audiences, while simultaneously earning serious critical and awards attention typically reserved for smaller, more restrained dramas. The film's box office trajectory unfolded gradually rather than through a single explosive opening weekend, a pattern industry analyst described as somewhat unusual for a film built around large-scale visual spectacle. Rather than front-loading its earnings, Life of Pi built momentum steadily over several months, crossing the 500 million worldwide threshold roughly 2 months after its release, a milestone reached on the strength of continuing box office contributions from markets across Asia, Europe, and Latin America, even as the film's domestic run had largely concluded. By the time it crossed that threshold, the film had earned roughly $100 million domestically against more than $400 million internationally, illustrating just how heavily the picture's ultimate financial success depended on audiences outside North America. Trade press coverage from the period repeatedly returned to the same framing. A film that had once seemed like a significant financial gamble for Fox, burdened by an unproven teenage lead, a mostly digital co star, and a story built around introspection rather than action, had instead turned into one of the studio's more profitable releases of the year, aided enormously by a release strategy that prioritized staggered market specific rollouts abroad over a single unified global opening weekend. Critical reaction to Life of Pi upon its release was strongly positive, arriving after years of skepticism within the industry about whether Martel's novel could be adapted into a coherent film at all. Given its unconventional structure, its heavy reliance on interior narration and philosophical reflection, and its central image of a boy and a tiger sharing a lifeboat for the better part of a year, a premise that, described in the abstract, struck many observers as more suited to animation or literary fiction than a live action studio release. Reviewers frequently singled out the film's visual craftsmanship, its handling of a story long considered nearly unfilmable, and Suraj Sharma's performance in his very first screen role. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating in the mid to high 80s among the several hundred reviews tallied there, with the site's critical consensus describing it as a visually stunning adventure combining genuine emotional and philosophical depth. On Metacritic, which assigns a weighted average score based on mainstream critic reviews, the film scored in the high 70s out of 100, a rating the site characterizes as indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore on opening weekend gave the film an A grade, a strong score reflecting positive word of mouth among the general movie-going public. Individual reviews from prominent critics echoed this overall positive consensus. Roger Ebert awarded the film a full 4-star rating, calling it a remarkable achievement of storytelling and a landmark work of visual filmmaking, praising the way Lee and his collaborators had managed to render Martel's dense, philosophically layered novel into something that worked as pure cinema rather than a dutiful literary adaptation. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone praised Lee's use of 3D technology, writing approvingly that the director employed the format with the delicacy and lyricism of a poet rather than as a gimmick, and suggesting that audiences did not simply watch the film so much as experience it directly. A.O. Scott, writing for the New York Times, offered similarly high praise, arguing that the film put stereoscopic 3D technology in the hands of a genuine film artist for perhaps the first time in the format's modern resurgence, and echoing the language later used by Peter Travers, describing Lee's command of the format as possessing the delicacy and lyricism of a poet rather than the bombast typically associated with 3D blockbusters. Coverage in outlets ranging from mainstream daily newspapers to specialist trade publications repeatedly returned to the same through line that Lee had managed to use cutting edge effects technology in service of an intimate, philosophically minded story rather than allowing the technology to dictate or overwhelm the material, a combination many critics considered rare in large budget studio filmmaking of the period. Much of the critical commentary around the film's release focused on two closely related achievements: the technical accomplishment of creating a believable digital tiger, convincing enough to anchor an entire film's emotional stakes, and the performance of Suraj Sharma, who carried enormous stretches of the film essentially alone, often acting against a co star that would not exist in its final form until long after filming had wrapped. Critics broadly praised Sharma's ability to project a rich inner life and a wide emotional range in near total isolation, noting that his performance gave the film's more abstract, philosophical passages a grounded emotional core they might otherwise have lacked. James Cameron, whose own work with 3D technology had shaped much of the industry conversation around the format in the years prior, praised Life of Pi specifically for demonstrating that stereoscopic 3D did not need to be reserved for large scale action spectacle to be effective, pointing to the film as evidence that the technology could serve a quieter, more intimate, and philosophically ambitious story just as powerfully. The film's critical success translated directly into a dominant showing during the subsequent awards season. At the 85th Academy Awards, Life of Pi received 11 nominations in total, second only to Steven Spielberg's Lincoln among that year's contenders, with nods including Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay. The film ultimately won 4 Academy Awards: Best Director for Ang Lee, Best Cinematography for Claudio Miranda, Best Visual Effects for the Rhythm and Who's Led FX team, and Best Original Score for Michael Dana. Lee's win made him the first Asian filmmaker to win the Best Director award twice, having previously won for Brokeback Mountain. The film also received 3 Golden Globe nominations, including Best Motion Picture, Drama, and Best Director, ultimately winning the Golden Globe for Best Original Score. The film's awards run extended well beyond the Oscars and Golden Globes into a wide range of guild and critics organizations. At the British Academy Film Awards, Life of Pi received 9 nominations, trailing only Lincoln, which led the field with 10 and tying with Les Miserables for the second highest nomination count of the year. Its BAFTA nominations included nods for Ang Lee's direction, David Magee's adapted screenplay, Claudio Miranda's cinematography, and Michael Dana's score, among other categories. The film also won at the Producers Guild of America Awards and received recognition from numerous specialty and craft organizations, including the Art Directors Guild, where production designer David Gropman won in the fantasy film category, reflecting the extensive world building involved in recreating Pondicherry, the cargo ship Chimsum, and the lifeboat sequences. Visual effects artists Eric Jan de Boer, Matsume, Brian R. Wells, Vinayak Pawar, and animation lead Michael Holzel received specific recognition for their character animation work on Richard Parker from visual effects industry bodies, underscoring how much of the film's acclaim centered specifically on the tiger's performance as a piece of character animation rather than simply a technical showcase. The film was also named to the American Film Institute's annual Top 10 list, honoring the best films of the year. Not every aspect of the film's reception was without controversy. The visual effects industry's broader financial struggles became a talking point during the same award season in which Life of Pi was being celebrated, after lead effects house Rhythm and Hues filed for bankruptcy protection shortly before the Oscar ceremony, when the studio's visual effects supervisor, Bill Westenhofer, attempted to acknowledge the situation during his acceptance speech at the ceremony. His microphone was cut off as the show's producers played music from Jaws to move the broadcast along, a moment that drew significant criticism from effects artists and became a rallying point for wider industry conversations about compensation and working conditions within the visual effects field. Even as the technical achievement being honored that night was almost universally praised beyond professional critics, general audience reaction to the film was also notably strong, reflected in the A-score moviegoers gave the film through CinemaScore polling on its opening weekend, a grade indicating a high degree of audience satisfaction and one that often correlates with a film's ability to sustain box office momentum through positive word of mouth in the weeks following release, rather than relying solely on opening weekend curiosity. This pattern arguably played out in the film's own box office trajectory, given how much of its ultimate financial success depended on steady, sustained performance over an extended run rather than a single explosive opening. The film's family friendly PG rating, awarded in the United States for scenes of animal violence and thematic peril rather than for more explicit content, also allowed it to serve as a rare offering for family audiences amid a late 2012 release slate otherwise dominated by more adult oriented awards contenders. Not every critic was uniformly enthusiastic, and even largely favorable reviews frequently paired their praise with specific reservations. Critic James Berardinelli, writing for Real Views, described the film as a curious blend of the mundane and the majestic, arguing that while its quieter, more hypnotic passages achieved a genuine spiritual power, other stretches, particularly toward the film's conclusion, struck what he considered a jarringly discordant note. Berardinelli suggested that the production's achievement owed at least as much to its extraordinary visual effects work as to the underlying strength of its narrative or emotional storytelling, a sentiment echoed by several other critics who, while impressed by the technical craft on display, felt that the film's script occasionally stumbled over the same structural challenges that had made the novel notoriously difficult to adapt in the first place. Some reviewers took specific issue with the framing device conversations between the adult pie and the visiting writer, arguing that these interludes slowed the film's momentum and leaned at times towards sentimentality, even as they acknowledged that the device was faithful to the structure of Martel's source novel. Writing for IndieWire, critic Eric Kahn offered a similarly qualified assessment, suggesting that Lee had managed to turn the inherent limitations of the source material into the adaptation's greatest strength, even while the film continued to show surface level problems with structure and dialogue inherited from the challenge of translating such an unconventional novel to the screen. Despite these reservations, the balance of critical opinion remained decisively positive, and the film's dominant showing throughout the 2012-2013 award season, anchored by its 4 Academy Award wins and its sweep of major precursor prizes for visual effects and cinematography, reinforced the sense among most critics that Life of Pi represented a genuine achievement in bringing an ostensibly unfilmable story to the screen. Retrospective assessments of the film in the years following its release have generally continued to view it favorably, with many critics and fans citing it as a high watermark for the use of both stereoscopic 3D and photorealistic digital creature work in mainstream studio filmmaking, and as one of the more successful examples of adapting a novel long considered resistant to conventional cinematic treatment.